Were you starting with let's not waste any time
No,
type
let's
of
not.
process?
What is the meaning of life, Dominique? Let's just get down to it.
Yeah, 2 minutes to say that.
Hopefully more than 2 minutes. Welcome, everybody, and I'm very happy to be back with you again in our Dharma Discussion series for the Meditation for Aikido 9-month continuity program. And today I'm with an old Dharma friend, Aikido friend, Dominique Cassidy, who I have known for many years now.
Around 20.
Is it that long? No way. Oh
I'm
my
sorry.
God.
This made us look really
Oh
old.
my
No,
gosh.
couple of years.
Yes. Back when we were just kids.
No, maybe it's 18 years,
Oh my
something like
gosh. Wow. Amazing, huh? So the fruit continues to ripen. So that's actually a beautiful thing. Anyways, I'm very happy that Dominique has agreed to kind of do this Dharma discussion with me. Really about meditation, but what's also unique about Dominique is not only does she have a depth of understanding in meditation, but she also has a depth of understanding in Aikido. She's been practicing for, I guess, more than 20 years. Yeah, quite some time. And Dominique also happens to be a psychiatrist, doctor, and mindfulness facilitator. And she's actually done a lot of work in bringing, I don't know, spiritual competency to the medical
that.
profession. Is that fair to say it that way?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm sure you can, if we get to that point, you can tell us a
Okay.
bit more about that. But basically, Dominique, what I'd like to do today is I want to kind of talk to you a little bit and get your perspective on specifically meditation, and then meditation how it relates to Aikido, of course. And the thing is, so my tradition, as you know, is more in the early Buddhist tradition of Vipassana meditation, which is the core practice is mindfulness, which is a dualistic practice in the sense that there's subject-object. That mindfulness observes, you detach as a subject and you observe an object. Even the subjective sense of self, you detach, and that subject-object duality goes all the way to awakening, and it's little degrees of awakening, deeper and deeper degrees of awakening, until there's some greater awakening. And of course, those moments of awakening are always there's that moment where the subject, you're able to detach from some type of core sense of self and observe it as the pure observer. You can't really say there's self-other, but there is that sense of object. There's like pure objectivity. And in that sense, it's a non-self tradition, at least the way that I relate to it and the way that I teach it, as opposed to a non-dual tradition where it's a different process. The awakening is awakening, but it's has a different flavor, and there's a different methodologies for that and different approaches. And what I would love to do is I'd love to hear from you. Just in that context, what is meditation for you, and what is awakening in that context?
Were you starting with let's not waste any time
No,
type
let's
of
not.
process?
What is the meaning of life, Dominique? Let's just get down to it.
Yeah, 2 minutes to say that.
Hopefully more than 2 minutes.
Well, just in terms of tradition, because you mentioned a background of your own tradition, and I really appreciate when somebody's involved into one path. It makes a conversation much easier.
Right.
I'm part of this. I'm a product of our culture, which is quite individualistic. So more and more people are not following one tradition only, but are actually moving around different aspects of different tradition, and that's my tradition, to be not necessarily connected or only aligned with one tradition.
Right.
But it is the direction that I'm definitely most connected to is a non-dual Hindu and Buddhist perspective. So any perspective that is looking at a non-dual, both understanding and experiencing of reality. So the path, the most direct path towards that understanding is about questioning what is the nature of reality and what is this self. And what we want is at the end to dissolve the notion of an observer and something that's observed. So there's so many similarities actually between what you're describing and what is it that I'm doing. And I'm not quite sure when we start to speak about really what is awakening. there's so many different ways to speak about it, and using same words with different meanings.
Right.
Speaking of the same experience with different words, so it becomes quite challenging to actually know to make a distinction between what you're speaking about and what I'm speaking about.
Well, what I would love to do, would love to speak about this and certainly hear your perspective on it, but then also relate it to methodologies, like meditative traditions or meditative methods. I know in the non-dual traditions, there's kind of, in some cases, there's a no method, which actually is a method, but it's like let go of all methods. And then there are methods like like you said, the spiritual inquiry, who am I, neti, etc., that will take you into this sense of, as you say, dissolving the observer. So maybe you can speak about that non-dual state when the observer is dissolved, and then maybe we'll get into some methodologies a little bit later.
So a nice way to speak about awakening is that it's a non-event. It's not something that happens. Awakening is getting in touch and abiding in a taste of reality which has always been here. It is not something new that happens in time and space. It is the dissolving of an old idea.
So let me just stop you there if I can, because let's say you meet a teacher, you go for a retreat or something, and you have this experience, and you come back. The people around you would notice something different, and they would say, "Wow, she went to that retreat, and there was an event happened to her." So from the outside, somebody may say there was an event, and for the observer, for the self, it might be an event. But what you're talking about is actually, if the self's not there, then there's no event. If it didn't happen to the self, then it's not really happening. Is that kind of the sense?
Let me use a metaphor. It's always easier. Otherwise, we use complicated conceptual words, and maybe it's not the most practical. But if we use the image of a movie on a screen, so there's a movie with a story, and in the story there is Miles and Dominique having a chat on Skype. So that's the movie, and it's constantly changing. It's made of colors, forms, names, concepts. There's a beginning and an ending to every sequence of the story. There is time and space, and that is always in movement. Now, what happens is that's where we live usually. We live in that type of reality, and we are identified with a character in a movie. So what we all do want, all the characters in the movie truly want one thing. We all want to be truly happy, truly at peace. All the characters in the movie want that. If you pick up anybody in the street and you've asked them, what do you really want? You take out the layers and the layers of, the stupid answer you'll get with getting a new car and getting a new blah, blah, blah. But really what we all deeply want is to be at peace, to be unwaveringly happy. So when a character in a movie starts to look for that unconditioned peace or happiness, then it starts to look somewhere else than in the movie itself. It's not happening there. How could it? The movie is always changing. There's nothing stable there. You think you have something, you think that's it, I'm happy, and then it's gone. That's the nature of the movie. And going to a teacher or to a beautiful Aikido seminar or to a meditation class, suddenly the small character sees that there is a screen. And in that seeing that there is a screen, the character finds something which is unconditional, ever-present, pure, peaceful, a sense of absolute coherence. So that's the first stage, when the character sees that there's a movie. The character sees that there is a screen.
Right.
That's not awakening. That's a spiritual experience. That's when the identity is still here. There's still an eye looking at the world, and then that eye suddenly is like, oh my God, there's something else, which is ever-present. And there I'm at peace. So the tendency is to cultivate that. How did I get there? Well, I went to this teaching, and I went to this class, and I went to this practice, and I do it more and more and more. And maybe sometimes I have more and more of those experiences, and we can actually become very, very good at it. We can induce states of samadhi, of this seeing of the screen, and we can even remain there. And then it fades, and then we get back into the movie.
It's also conditioned.
It's also conditioned.
Right, yeah.
So now, when I speak of of awakening in the tradition that I come from, a non-dual tradition, is that's not awakening, that's spiritual experiences. Now, awakening is when the screen realizes it's been the movie the whole time. There's a shift. Before the when something says I, it's I, Dominique, in the movie, talking to Miles. After awakening, when something says I, it's the screen, which is not separate from the movie, upon which the movie unfolds, but that is never touched nor ever disturbed by the movie.
Right.
So it's a shift of perspective, but it comes with the realization, the screen realizes, oh, I've always been there. I've always been myself.
The movie
So
has
there's
the movie has
change.
the movie has a beginning and an end, or a scene, or another episode, or whatever. But the screen is ever present. Was never born.
Yeah.
Never die. And what
the screen is not in a place. I mean, we're using a metaphor of a screen, so we think there's actually something upon something. It's
yes.
The limitation of a metaphor.
Sure.
But the screen has no beginning, nor has it an ending, and it's never changing, and it's not in time. But upon it, and thanks to its grace, the movie is being created, constantly unfolding within it, ever and ever changing. So that's why I'm saying it's not really an event, because nothing really happened. There is, from the perspective of the character in the movie, what changes is that when it says I, it speaks from a different ground. But it's not anything that actually is truly new. It's always been the case. Now, in the movie, when the small character talks with other characters, something has definitely happened, because suddenly that character knows it is peace. Before that, the small character was looking for peace.
Right.
I need something to be fulfilled, to be complete. I need something to finally rest.
Right.
I need something to be truly and deeply happy. So I'm on a quest.
Right.
Whether it's by getting a new car or whether it's by trying a new meditation practice. There's nothing wrong with that quest.
Right.
It's
in the dimension of time and space.
Exactly.
There's a
exactly.
before and an after.
And so when there is that shift, the character in the movie is not searching anymore, because the screen has always found itself. The screen doesn't ever need to find the screen. It just is itself. So that's the most direct way of speaking of awakening that I have, is that it's a shift of I, Dominique, to I, that which is. That's the way I would call it, that which is.
Yeah. So what is the screen? This I, that which is. How would you?
So, well, see, that's the beauty and the struggle that we all have with that.
Yes. But it's the best. It's the best beauty and the best struggle. It's the best struggle. It's the one worthy struggle. Truly worthy struggle.
So we can only speak of it with poetry, and or fully knowing that everything we say could never ever be it.
Touch it, right?
How could the movie speak of what creates it? How could the knife cut itself? How could fire burn itself? But nonetheless, we can speak of the impact in the character in the movie once it's realized its true nature. And that impact is a profound change in the way the character is playing in the movie.
Well,
what happens?
Please.
What happens when we stop acting out of fear? When we don't believe that we need to get something? When we realize that what we truly are was never born and never dies? That nothing, absolutely nothing, can ever fulfill us. That we don't have any needs. That we're never going anywhere. So that from that place, there's a tremendous sense of peace and clarity. And then there is space. There is space for different ways of being in the world. So that's one way to speak of the change in the movie. But now, what is the screen?
Yeah.
Exactly that. We all know it because it's the most intimate. We give it different names. Consciousness, God, the Absolute, Rigpa, the natural state, Tao. But it's a name given to what is the closest to us. What knows this moment? What is this moment? In the Upanishad, they describe beautifully what hears but cannot be heard by the ears, what sees but cannot be seen by the eyes, what thinks but cannot be thought of by thought. But those are very beautiful words. What I'm speaking about is a direct taste, so close to us.
Yeah.
So close to us. It's where we're alive before life, where we're completely safe, where we're at home.
Total security, total peace, total satisfaction. Yeah, in a way, the words that we use, I mean, they can be pointing out words that help us get there, but the words that we use are even poetry in this case, even any type of expression, still of the movie.
There's nothing else visible than the movie.
There's nothing else with right. And yet it can bring us closer to an experience of a direct experience of the screen as ourself, as who we are.
It can lead us to a seeing of the screen. Now, that shift from seeing the screen to realizing one is the screen, it's not something that can be practiced.
Yeah, right. So that in that sense, the practices will always keep you in that state of separation from, in the duality from the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if it's like a divine practice and, and it's all for the best reasons, a spiritual tradition or a New Age tradition, it doesn't matter. Any methodologies enforce, maybe at a very subtle level, but they enforce us the duality, the separation.
It implies a duality.
It implies a duality.
If there's a practice, there's a practitioner practicing towards something. So there is actually three things there. But there's a duality implied in the word practice. Now, it doesn't mean that we should not practice. But that's a different thing. Some very pure non-dual contemporary traditions, because there's a difference between the neo non-dual scene and the older non-dual teachings. But the neo-Advaita tendency is to speak of absolutely no practice. Realize who you are, and that's it.
Right. Yeah.
And they're right, but it's not enough. In essence, they're true. There's absolutely nothing one can ever do so that the screen sees itself. That's a movement of grace. It just happens. Actually, it doesn't happen. So it's not something we can practice. But it doesn't mean, and I think I'm not really agreeing with people saying that there's no practice necessary. Because there is absolutely the necessity for practice.
Sure. Yeah, I usually say that there's nothing we can do to get there, literally. There's nothing we can do to become the screen. But the practices, there's a lot of practice we can do to create the conditions for for the ripening of the fruit to fall from the tree, for that shift to happen. But really, the shift itself, there's no agency in it. There's nothing that can... And like for example, in the Tibetan traditions, they talk about the preliminaries, that you have. And again, this is probably somebody living up on the Tibetan plateau who's a yak herder or something. They would probably have very little education in their life, just pure being. But the preliminary practices can be 20 years of practices before you get to practice this, practicing towards a shift, which, okay, fine. But I think, like many of us in the West, we're definitely overdeveloped in the mind in our Western society. But there does tend to be I also think we have a lot of discipline already developed Especially, I mean, if you've gone through an education system, there's a certain discipline of the mind that I don't think it takes 20 years of preliminary practices to come closer to practicing a direct practice. But I agree that just starting from zero and saying there's no practice is it's so difficult, and maybe even
Yeah,
delusional. It can be self-deluding a little bit.
absolutely. Yeah. But what's been changing in, if we think of those Tibetan plateau all those 100 years ago, and now is what you're pointing at, is that the fact we have been evolving
Hmm.
culturally, and consciousness has been evolving. So what they were attempting to do a few 100 years ago in terms of the preliminary practice, it has to be adapted. But
Yeah.
now an interesting question would be, what would you think, or maybe we could explore that together, what would you think would be the aspect of our in our culture, I mean at that time, that needs to be practiced or developed to create that space, to create ourselves, to create some space for a movement towards awakening?
I've never thought about that. That's a good question.
Because some people really say, I mean, there's a lot of teachings that says that just realize who you are, and then the person might have spiritual experiences and might have actually a profound shift. But and we've seen very beautiful spiritual teachers, they speak with profound depth, but ethically speaking, they're just absolute asshole.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, if you think what all the traditional religions give you, the bottom of it all, foundation of it all is morality and ethics.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
once and as Westerners, I mean, living in the West, sure, there's good people and bad people, and you and I can cross that line any time if we're not mindful. But I think there's something about our education, our cultural tradition, where ethics, at least to a certain extent, has been
mm-hmm,
already internalized
mm-hmm,
culturally.
mm-hmm.
In kindergarten, you learn, you get this education of what's good and what's bad. Now, it becomes much more complex, and especially when you're working, I guess, in the medical field and as a teacher, and there's a whole ethical philosophy that should, not philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
but teaching that should go along with each aspect that we're working in, the complexity of the field that we're in. But I think that in the West, and perhaps in many ways in the East as well, that certain basic level of ethics and morality has been internalized to a large extent. Not that we're free there. We still have to really pay attention.
There, I agree with you. And for a long time, I thought that was really my argument. I was saying, because I never did those preliminary practice either,
Yeah, neither did
by the
I.
way.
No.
And I
Well, I
always
mean,
thought,
in Aikido we did. Come on. We know what it means to sit
yes,
in a straight line. We know what it means to, keep the spine
yeah,
straight.
yeah,
And
yeah.
anyways, go ahead.
So, and it's true what you're saying in our culture, in terms of morality and ethics, though, we looking at the politics right now, I'm not sure we would necessarily agree it's
Sure,
consistent, but
sure.
let's assume that we're all good Aikido people that actually believe in non-violence
Okay,
and
all right.
believe in the welfare of others.
Yep.
But so yes, it's not at that level. It's not in the basic ethical realm that I believe we have to do some work. I think we have to look at where is it that we are pathologically hurt in our psyche during this time.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
I think where that place is in our individuality. We moved from the tendency right now for each of us is to have been raised individualistically. It's me, my world, my life, what I want to do, what I deserve, what I shouldn't. Everything is
There's a lot
self-referential.
of I.
It's only I,
Yeah, right.
what I need for myself
Right.
to be happy. And there's lots of reasons why we got here, and actually it's a very good transition towards a
Sure.
deeper perspective. But that's usually even if we have a pluralistic perspective or even an integral perspective, we still have been raised in a very individualistic model.
For sure.
And I think that's where the purification process needs to happen.
Well, I think you said something. Do you think that there's been a lot of this kind of shift into individuality has created certain emotional wounding or psychological wounding that we need
It
to?
does. It does actually, and that's a really good hypothesis for the amount of pathology about stress and burnout.
But
Before,
sorry, do you think the modern man and woman or postmodern man and woman has a more psychological wounding than a traditionalist, than somebody living up on the Tibetan plateau?
No. It's just that the type of pathology expressed by a human being is always in connection to its culture and society.
Yes.
So I'm not thinking more or less. I'm thinking different.
Okay, got it.
And so, maybe in the feudal time in Tibet, what was really important is don't kill people or don't steal.
Don't steal, right.
Or,
listen to your parents. Listen to what listen to what the emperor says. Right, yeah.
So that's where they really needed to work out. And what really we need to work out is in this sense of isolation that we are creating around ourselves by being self-centered in a way which is quite extraordinary, actually. And that's where I believe the purification process would be useful, is to release this, because that's what limits us in awakening. See, if the character in the movie is so attached to its image, the image of that I have on Facebook, in front of my friends, on WhatsApp. I mean, it's all image based, right? Mm-hmm. Right? This year.
Yes.
Really important. That's how we connect to the world.
Sure. We have an online presence, which is completely curated.
Yeah.
I can. Hopefully, they only see the best of me online, and I look pretty close to perfect online. But I can tell you, I'm not perfect. Offline, I'm.
No. I don't say that.
Offline, I'm very different, but we can curate ourselves, which is also very narcissistic. It can be a very narcissistic endeavor.
Yeah. So now, of course, we're taking this narcissism with us on our spiritual path.
Sure, of course.
And how exciting is it to become the awakened one? I mean, this is pretty cool on a website. Let me tell you about it.
This is the most, it's the most narcissistic reward we can get.
So that's a hindrance. That's definitely a limitation.
Right.
To be able to, because when the character is seen from the perspective of the screen, when the screen wakes up to itself, when the screen sees the character as a movement of itself in itself, but definitely not a limitation of itself, the character becomes much less important.
And
its relevance
and much more transparent.
It becomes completely transparent.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and
like the whole world.
Yeah, beautiful and liberated, and at the same time, the screen can inhabit the character, and I think there's a certain permeability that happens within and without of the egoic structures. That gives a certain emotional freedom and emotional agility in dealing with life, because
So if you're speaking of a going into a more egoic structure or back, you're speaking of in the non-dual Hindu tradition they speak of oscillation.
Okay.
That means it's not stable. In different texts, old Advaita texts, they speak of different levels of jnani, different levels of awakened one. And so you can have an individual who dissolves in the screen, so the screen sees itself, but that's not constant.
Sure.
So every once in a while, something happens in the movie, and whoop, we're back into I'm me, and that's my movie, and I need to protect this one, and then it's gone, and whoop, there's a back as the screen resting with itself.
Right.
And that's the first level of jnani. So there has been.
That's the oscillation that you're talking about. That's not what I'm speaking about. But please continue, because that's like that is a stage, a phase that one will experience in the practice. Or maybe they come close to their teacher or their poet or poetry, or they go to the nature and they can find the screen and find that they are the screen again under the right conditions.
Well, it's slightly different. The way I would see it is slightly different than a spiritual experience. A spiritual experience is I, Dominique, find the screen again. Mm-hmm. After awakening is I, screen, know myself again.
Yes.
It's it's from a different side.
I got it. Totally. Yeah.
So there's a first level of that awakening where it's still possible for the screen to forget itself. They have this beautiful word, vismarana smaran in Sanskrit, which is the forgetfulness of the truth and the remembrance of the truth.
Beautiful.
and one can go back and forth. And then there's an intermediate level of jnani where this happens really rarely.
And before you say that, can you just define jnani for the listeners?
Jnani is
a man or woman.
Jnani is knowledge. Jnani is the one that knows.
Okay.
Actually, Gyan is the same root as knowledge, the KN of knowledge.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
It's an Indo-European connection between Sanskrit and English languages. So we know the word in knowledge or connaissance in French. It also has this JN in it.
Interesting.
So a Jnani can... Then there's a next stage where the Jnani... The screen can forget about itself, but it's very rare. And that the story of Marpa just seeing, the Tibetan master whose son died. Was it Marpa or Milarepa? No, Marpa, where his son died. And when his son died, he started to cry and to cry and to cry. And his students were like, well, Master, you're telling us that nothing is real. The world has no consistency. And here you are crying for your son. And he responded, yes, but that's a very big illusion. This one's a very big illusion.
Yeah, right.
So they can be still really extreme situation where there's a forgetfulness. And then there is the one where there's no oscillation anymore, where the screen unwaveringly knows itself as itself, never doubts its own nature. And never really have met anybody like that. I've always seen people even people with profound depth, slight oscillation every once in a while. Some people say it's so rare that don't even think of it. There can be oscillations that last years. You can have people with a profound and authentic knowing of themselves last for years and years, and then suddenly they're back into the individuality.
Right, yeah. Are you familiar with Tozan's 5 stages?
No.
Tozan was a Zen master in China, and basically these are 5 stages that are kind of a cycle of a spiritual maturing of a spiritual process. And the first stage is seeing the relative in the absolute. Seeing the absolute in the relative. So we get a glimpse of the absolute.
Yes. Okay.
The spiritual experience that you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it's gone. And then they take on then there's the commitment to a path of practice. There's that awakening that there's something beyond the daily suffering that I have, and then there's the commitment to the path of practice, which is the second stage. It's called stabilizing the absolute and the relative. Mm-hmm. And the third stage is the absolute, attaining the absolute. Okay. It's like the top. You're climbing the mountain, and you're at the top of the mountain. The fourth stage is seeing the relative in the absolute. That you begin to taste back into, dip back into the relative. And then the fifth stage is when the absolute and relative are one. It's the non-dual. It's the coming together. The absolute and the relative are one. And it's a beautiful process. And I think like having some experience of the absolute and then bringing that back into the relative, for me, is kind of a tantric practice. Not engaging duality, but never losing that. I shouldn't say never losing, but always having that reference of being able to get out of the duality of it, to see that there's an absolute state, but it's actually the merging of these two things that create a further deeper integration in the universe, basically. And then ultimately there's just no difference between the two.
There isn't any. Yeah. There's a beautiful, I don't know if you know the teachings of the Kashmir Shaivism.
I know it, but I don't know the teachings. Yeah.
It's a non-dual Hindu teaching from the 8th century. It blossomed in the 8th century and then it disappeared. And then it came back more recently with some people getting more interested in it. But it speaks of it very, very beautifully. It speaks in terms of Shiva. It's a Shaivaist tradition. But it's a non-dual one. So it speaks like there's Shiva, which is the screen, the absolute, never taking form, never becoming anything than itself, pure being. And then there is Shakti, his consort. Now, Shakti is the creative force. It's what creates this moment. Yeah. The constant movement, the vibration of this moment unfolding into new moments and new moments and new moments. And that's what we call creation or evolution. Yeah. Now, when it's spoken in poetry, it speaks of it as Shiva and Shakti are truly one. But for the beauty of their reunion, momentarily, they divide themselves. They seemingly divide
That is
themselves.
so awesome. That is so
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, they consciously it's an intentional act.
Yes. For the beauty of that moment where they are reunited.
That's so awesome.
And that moment of union between Shiva and Shakti, it sounds quite weird. I'm sure for people who have no understanding, they think, oh, this is quite philosophical and weirdly Hindu. But actually, those moments is the moments that we love in life.
But in the relative,
yes,
in the relative world, that's what we're always.
It's the moment where we say I love you and we say no word anymore and we connect. It's beautiful. Intimacy.
It's like as an individual, separate individual, those are the moments that we seek to return to God through communion with other.
So there is that happening with another. So there can be this moment of seeing our true nature in the midst of intimacy with another. Mm-hmm. But we can have it when we look at a beautiful landscape.
Totally.
Something disappears, right?
Yeah.
In the midst of beauty, something disappears. It's why we love good food.
There's
fantastic meal.
Beautiful. And we shift into something turns and we reach into a state of wholeness in that moment that is transient, that stays and lingers and passes. And I would even go, since we're also doing Aikido, I would say that tasting that in Aikido is really what we're seeking. And I think that when people say, "Oh, I love Aikido," that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about.
And actually, when we speak of Aikido, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, that's what we're talking about, exactly. But now, most people in fact are probably not talking about that because they're talking about their tradition or their school or their style or their whatever. But when they connect with what they really love about the art, I think that's what they're connecting with. Because it's unmistakable. Yeah,
and it's unconditionally beautiful, undoubtedly beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's actually well, actually, I don't know if it's right to say it's the purpose of our training, but it's such a shame, I think, when that's not put in the center of the training. And I think it's also, like you say, there's nothing we can do for that to happen. We can just come together in that conflict, in that separate states, and hope, and just kind of create the conditions, and then allow that shift to happen. But the more we do that, the more it happens.
Yes.
The probability of it happening becomes actually higher when we set our intentions towards it.
And we recognize it as well.
Yeah.
We become finer, the ability to recognize and then to remain in that movement. Like once in the midst of a Juaza, there's this very small moment of absolute perfection, complete harmony. There's no me, there's no you. There's just this movement that is in complete congruence with itself, and I'm not doing, you're not doing, but we both recognize there's something magical. There's a smile on the face. There's it's a moment of profound gratitude and the feeling of being absolutely alive. So when we recognize it, at first we just, oh, this was great, and then it's gone. But when we know what it is, that's always conditional, but when we know what it is and we recognize it, then we can keep ourselves there.
Yeah. So it's the recognition. We need to be, at some point we need to reflect consciously that this is something different. This is something special. This is something that's me. It's a deeper sense of who I am, and that helps us to. I didn't mean to cut you off. You said that you were speaking about the importance of that recognition.
Because once there's that recognition, then we become interested in, okay, what is limiting that?
Yeah.
Why is it only lasting for a second? If the screen is all the time here, why am I only seeing it when I go in a retreat center?
Exactly. Yeah, right.
It's a shame. So if the screen is always there, then I am not able to see something. I don't have the right glasses.
Exactly. Yeah.
And actually, it's not that I don't have the right glasses. It's just I look at the wrong place.
Yeah.
And so, because we're always looking inside the movie. What can I get for myself? What am I becoming? What is happening to me? Where am I going? Where did I go? How do I feel? What do I want? This is our referential. We're back to this purification required at the level of individuality. So because that's our grounds most of the time, this is where we're spending our time.
So in this sense, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying that's where we're looking.
So in this sense, that moment of dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness or the suffering or the dissatisfaction or the pain or that never being satisfied because of the separation, that moment is actually a moment of awakening that, hang on, I want to investigate here. I want to inquire into, who, not just what is this, because it's still out there, but why is this happening? What's going on here? What is it? Inquire into the subjectivity of it,
Mm-hmm.
which would help create the conditions for shifting back.
And that's the true blessing of the dukkha.
Yeah.
It's that it is ultimately a pointer towards the truth, just as conflict is.
Exactly. That and
conflict in Aikido is the pointer that we have forgotten that we truly, in essence, are harmony.
And that's the path. The path is saying, look, conflict, if we just kind of superimpose Buddhism, the truth of conflict, any separation is going to be painful. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's just it. And the truth of that is that's what it's like in a relative world. That is a reference point. That is an orientation to turn into it in the right way, or to embrace it, to open up to it, to ground and connect. And that leads towards wholeness. That leads towards awase. That leads to the blend.
It's the fuel for the path.
It's the fuel for the path. Right, right. So this brings up so many different things that I want to talk about, but I want to be respectful of your time, because maybe we'll have to do it another time. But we haven't spoke about creativity, and I don't want to go into that now, because if it happens, it's great. But that's like a whole another conversation. I also specifically, because you're also a doctor, a psychiatrist, excuse me. I would love to talk also about the spiritual bypass, because I think that's such an important piece of human knowledge that anybody who's practicing for some type of spiritual development needs to understand. But I don't know that we have time to go into that here. But what I guess maybe you could just say a few words. I would love to hear a few words about the actual method or the practice. At the beginning you mentioned inquiry, you mentioned a few things, but what are the practices that you do and that you can easily suggest to somebody, or that you teach?
So when I speak or when I teach, there's, for me, the two different people divide usually direct path and indirect path are separate.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't. I think they're just one path.
Sure. Yeah.
And so when I share with people, I go between those two. That is, one really important aspect is to start. I use a lot of questioning to start to question ourselves. What is it that I really, really want? Where do I spend my time in my mind? What is, because actually, if we do want to realize, if we do want to wake up, something has to really want it. And it can't be number 275 on the list. It has to be much higher on the list. And what happens usually, we think of spirituality, we're like, oh, that's great, I'll do a little meditation, I'll feel more relaxed, and I can go on with my life. It's not a bad thing, actually. I lead people into that a lot.
Sure.
I think it's a very good start. Yeah. But it's not enough. This is just barely dating. This is looking into the ad to find a partner. This is not marriage.
Right.
So there's a process of becoming more and more aware of what is it that we really want, what is truly important in our life, and what are the things that I'm spending all my time in that is of no relevance to that. In the Hindu tradition, they would be speaking of living a tamasic, or rajasic, or a sattvic life.
Which are?
Tamasic, if you think of food, tamasic is spoiled, old, bad fat, McDonald's, makes you sick type of food. Rajasic is spices, ginger, high sugar. It makes you very energized. And sattvic is fruit and vegetable and milk, makes you very peaceful and quiet. That's in the Hindu tradition.
Yeah.
So we can live a life which is more or less like that. We can do a lot of things which are terrible for our mind. We can do things which is constantly activating for our mind.
Yeah.
Or we can turn our minds towards the Dharma, towards the teaching, towards meditation. So the amount of time that we're spending by actually hurting our mind, getting our mind completely wind up or bringing the mind into a direction of awakening, that has a big influence. So to start to question in our day-to-day life, how much time do I spend thinking about beauty or truth or unconditional love? How much time of my day am I there? And if I'm there only for a small percentage, then what am I doing the rest of the time?
Right.
Now, being Rajasic, being highly involved and hyperactive and in motion, there's nothing wrong with that. We're all suffering from that in our culture. But we need to do some work in disengaging a little bit. Is it so important that I have more friends on Facebook?
Yeah.
Is it so important that I'm in contact with everybody all the time? Do I really have to look at my cell phone 15 times a day? So those are really small details, but it's starting to look at the way I live. So this is very, very, very much a progressive path, right?
Right.
Rounds into the day-to-day life. Where do I spend my time? So that's one aspect. Then it's about also in an indirect process to start looking at the mind itself. How is this mind? What is the level of agitation, confusion, disorganization? And is it possible to align the mind, to bring the mind to more quietness? In that sense, we're doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Everybody washes their body every day, and we brush our teeth every day. But no, people don't meditate every day. And I'm like, would you
don't
go
wash
out?
the mind, yes, and
Yes.
brush the mind from its.
Imagine if somebody tells me, I meditate once a week. Is it enough? I say, well, that's great, but what, do you brush your teeth once a week?
Some people do.
Well,
so I know some yogis who do that.
It's different. They're beyond that.
Yes.
We're still very, very low, Miles. We still brush our teeth.
Yeah, we want to have teeth into our 60s and 70s. Real teeth.
So there's that's the whole preparation, actually. There is also training the mind so that it actually can look in the direction. See, if the character in the movie is constantly looking at the movie, he will never see the screen. It just doesn't happen. It needs to stop, and it needs to stop being distracted by all that's happening into the movie, and then the movie's here, the screen is here. So that's the whole progressive long learning of mindfulness practice is about being able to stop looking at the screen, at the movie. So making a conscious choice that, no, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm just going to become more present, just more present and more present. So that the accident can happen, the accident being awakening.
Right. So you said there were three things. There was the...
So that's another aspect.
Examining your life, how we spend time. That was number one.
Yeah.
Number two was purifying the mind a little bit. Sorry?
Yeah. Yes. Taking care of the mind.
Taking care of the mind.
Yes. Teaching the mind to become present, to stop being distracted. And then to start questioning. What is this I that I refer to all the time?
Right.
What is this world that I consider outside of myself? We spend most of our time protecting an ego, protecting a me. I want, I need, I fear, what is it? I mean, if we're spending so much time taking care of it, it better be there. Otherwise, it's such a waste of time.
Yeah.
But what actually is it? And to go really start looking, and not looking intellectually, not going into philosophies, but to actually in our own experience.
Because we usually look out from that place and question. Yeah. What is this? Yeah. What is he? Why do I do that? But it's an internal looking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the character in the movie stops looking at the movie, but starts looking within itself and to find the screen.
Right. Now, we could spend a full hour talking about this. I mean, this is the practice of inquiry, basically.
Yeah.
Can you just, because we're coming to the end of the hour, could you just say a few words about that practice and in whatever way you want?
A beautiful way to do it is to sit quietly. Quietly, I mean, having done some meditation, and so there's no distraction anymore. We're not constantly grabbed by thoughts. We're completely just present. And to bring up this sense of I am Dominique, or I am me. And to start to look, where is this I am come from? There's this silence, and then there is I am, da 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 da. So what we're interested in is to go back and to remain at that place where there's a moment from silence, and then there's I am.
So locating that subjective, I don't want to say
the
essence,
moment where
'cause
it's
not,
arising.
yeah, there's almost like a fixation there, a contraction there, something.
Yeah.
It can be in the
Yeah.
body, but if we look more, we'll see that it's actually deeper than that.
It's both, actually. And when you're speaking about the body, there's practices, because this is at the level of the mind. There's a mental identity.
Yes.
There's an identity at the level of the mind.
Yes.
That says I am this and I am that, and I like this and I like that, and I know this, and that's that level. But then there's an identity at the level of the body.
Yes.
That it's so primary identity.
Yes. Yes.
That's how the baby starts to build itself. This is my body, and
Right.
this is the table. That's not
Yes.
the same thing.
Right.
So we also need to go into that. But quite often it's good to start with dissolving the identity at the level of the mind. And for that to just constantly fall backward. Instead of being interested in what I am wants or says or needs or goes to, we just go back at its root. And if we're able to see its root and its arising and its disappearing, well, then we cannot be it.
Right.
And it sounds it's a profound seeing. If I can see the creation of an identity, by definition, I am not that identity.
Right.
I cannot be something that I'm watching. And if it appears and if it disappears, what is its reality? It's fabricated in a moment, and it's changing all the time. So we start looking at this construct that we have made of a solid me. I'm this, I like that, I do that, I go there. It's very solid. It seems. But it's solid like a cloud in the sky. When we look at the cloud at a distance, it looks like there is a cloud.
There's a boundary there. We could say, yeah.
Cloud, no cloud.
Right.
Dark cloud, clear cloud.
It's very
but when
clear.
we go very close,
Yeah.
and we try to touch the cloud, we only find the sky.
Yeah. Right.
So we need to do that for identity. We go inside and we go touch the beginning of the identity. And until we realize we're never touching anything.
Touching it with inquiry, touching it with
inquiry,
with investigation.
Yes, yeah. If I believe that I am me, well, then what is it?
Yeah.
Can you find one? Can you precisely point to one?
Yeah.
And if it's existing, it means it needs to be all the time the same.
Yeah.
All the time there. Otherwise, it's just relative.
Yeah. Right. And if you
So
do
we're very
find
close to
if you do find a boundary that's solid, kind of a rock bottom, then just stay with that and keep looking at it 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 and keep looking at it. And it's like the cloud. It will start to morph and change and eventually dissolve away.
When we go close enough to the cloud, you realize there's never been a cloud.
Right.
Only been sky. And then it's the same process with body, with the physical identity. Because we can be very, very free at the level of thoughts, but then we're completely overwhelmed by our emotions.
Yeah.
So somebody can have a profound seeing that I am is dissolved into emptiness and never existed. The identity, the way I thought it was existing, is not what I truly am. And that's very liberating. But then strong emotion still arises because an emotion is in the body.
Yeah.
It's in the body and the mind. It's both. But it's quite primordial.
Yes.
This sense of there's a center to awareness. There's a physical center somewhere.
Yes, yes.
And so that also needs to be looked into. And there is practices to start to dissolve the physical boundaries that we believe that we are. And so it's nice also to add that into it. But was not your question.
That's okay. I mean, I think what it points to is something very beautiful, is that, awakening, or the universal I, or this universal knowing, is always a very simple, direct experience. And then bringing that into the complexities, because already talking about mind and body is already like, whoa, that can be, there's a lot going on there. But mind, body, and emotions, and how they interplay and how they're embedded within each other. And then taking that into life, and into daily life, and into world, and into relationships, and into conflict, and in Aikido, things become incredibly complex, and yet always shifting or touching back in with the screen is just a simplicity to everything. That's just it just is.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, I think that it's as simple and as beautiful as.
And if you laughed, you are like, the beginner of the Zen tradition.
Yeah, exactly. That was very Zen. I could have done this, for that matter. Look. Oh, wait. And I have to tell you that this talk, Dominique, beautifully has emptied my cup. So we spoke kind of for a full hour. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
oh my God. And I think we could have continued, but we need to stop.
So let's continue in another time, another place, another way. I'd be very happy to. And it's always great to connect with you and see you and share and have a Dharma discussion. But it's also beautiful to hear your Dharma and your teaching and what you share with people. So, and I'm sure that the students from this course, it's about half men and half women. I think there's a few more women actually, but I'm sure that they're all going to appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's a delight to share with you and becoming creative with you. So it's great.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dominique.
Thanks a lot.
All the best.